Do you know that the Harlem Renaissance wasn't just about jams, poetry, and slick dance moves, but also about food that kept the spirit alive? From smoky collard greens simmered low and slow to rich peanut stews bubbling with flavor, these meals were the real unsung heroes of the era. They didn't just feed bellies, they fueled creativity, community, and courage. Here are 15 forgotten soul foods that fueled the Harlem Renaissance. Collard greens, a symphony in a pot. Do you know that collard greens were like the Beyoncé of the Harlem Renaissance kitchen? Always center stage, always stealing the show, and always backed up with some smoky notes of meat. The smell alone could make neighbors accidentally drop by at dinner time. Cooking collard greens wasn't just about throwing leaves in boiling water. No way. First, you wash them over and over because nothing kills a mood faster than biting into gritty greens. Once they were squeaky clean, the magic began. A big old pot of water, a smoked turkey wing or a ham hock dropped inside, and some chopped onions, garlic, and maybe a dash of red pepper flakes. Then came the greens, slowly simmering until they turned tender and silky. That pot wasn't just dinner, it was patience, history, and love all rolled into one. And let's not forget the pot liquor, that rich, savory juice at the bottom of the pot. Whew, that was pure liquid gold. People would sop it up with cornbread or drink it straight like a vitamin shot. That broth carried smoky, tangy, and spicy flavors that danced in your mouth. The taste of collard greens was bold and earthy, with just the right kick from the seasoning. They were filling, comforting, and cheap enough to keep big families fed. Back in the Renaissance, this dish meant survival with a side of soul. Today, they're still holding it down at Sunday dinners and holiday tables everywhere. Peanut stew, a hug in a bowl. Now let's talk peanut stew. Some folks called it ground nut stew, and it came straight from West Africa, but Harlem kitchens made it their own. Imagine walking into a kitchen filled with the smell of roasted peanuts, onions sizzling, and spices floating through the air. It was a warm hug in a bowl every single time. The recipe was simple, but the taste, oh, that was fireworks. You'd start with onions and garlic sautéing in a pot. Add in tomatoes, maybe some peppers for a little heat, then stir in creamy peanut butter or ground peanuts until the whole pot turned rich and thick. A bit of broth kept it from sticking, and then you dropped in sweet potatoes, chicken, or even greens. Slowly, everything melted together into this smooth, nutty, slightly sweet and spicy stew that could make anybody lick their spoon clean. For African Americans during the Harlem Renaissance, peanut stew was like a taste of home from across the ocean. It was hearty, filling, and worked with whatever you had in the pantry. No meat? No problem. The peanuts brought enough protein to keep everyone full. Add some rice on the side, and you had a meal fit for a king or a poet, fresh off a night at the Cotton Club. The best part? Peanut stew didn't just taste good. It carried history. It whispered stories of ancestors who kept their traditions alive with every stir of the pot. Rich, nutty, creamy, spicy. Every spoonful was both survival and celebration. Hot water, cornbread, crunchy gold on a plate. Now, do not let the name fool you. Hot water cornbread was not some plain piece of bread people threw together. No, sir. This was the crispy, golden superstar of soul food. If you have ever bitten into a hot water cornbread patty fresh out of the skillet, you know the sound alone. The crunch that wakes you up with flavor, that makes you grin from ear to ear, was all it took to turn a tough day into a good one. The recipe was as simple as it gets, and that is exactly what made it so powerful during hard times. Families did not need fancy ingredients or expensive tools. All you needed was cornmeal, a pinch of salt, maybe a spoon of sugar if you could spare it, and boiling hot water. That was it. Mix it all up until it came together into a thick, sticky batter. Then, with quick hands, shape it into little patties and slide them into sizzling hot oil. The kitchen would instantly fill with the smell of toasty corn, and you knew magic was happening. The first bite said it all. Crispy golden crust on the outside, soft and tender on the inside. It was the kind of bread that made beans taste better, collard green pot liquor richer, and soups feel like a feast. Even on its own with a pat of butter or a drizzle of syrup, hot water cornbread could carry a meal by itself. And when meat was scarce, this humble bread stretched bellies and stretched hope. During the Harlem Renaissance, hot water cornbread made its way from southern kitchens straight into the bustling heart of Harlem. Migrants carried the recipe north, and soon it was sizzling in skillets everywhere. From small apartments where families crowded around the table to Sunday church suppers where it was passed around like treasure. It was always the loyal sidekick, making every dish shine brighter. But here is the truth. Hot water cornbread served as survival baked in a skillet, with resilience that you could taste and creativity that turned the simplest ingredients into gold. Harlem may have been exploding with jazz, poetry, and art back in the Renaissance days, but in those African-American kitchens, hot water cornbread was the beat that kept families moving. One bite and you were not just eating bread. You were eating history, crunchy, golden history that fed both the body and the soul. Chitterlings, the true test of love. Now we are stepping into one of the most debated dishes in the history of soul food, chitterlings, better known as chitlins. These were not for the faint of heart. Chitlins were made from pig intestines, carefully cleaned and cooked until tender, and while the very thought of them could divide a room, they carried a story far greater than their smell or taste. The process of preparing chitlins was an act of patience and dedication. First came the cleaning, which was no small feat. Families filled buckets with water and vinegar, scrubbing the intestines over and over until every trace of grit was gone. It was often said that cooking chitlins was a 2-day ordeal, and many joked that it was also a test of love. If someone stuck by you during the cleaning and cooking, you knew they were in it for the long haul. The smell filled every corner of the house, but it was all part of the journey from scraps to supper. Once the long hours of cleaning were done, the real transformation began. Chitlins were simmered slowly with onions, garlic, peppers, and spices, sometimes with a touch of vinegar to balance the richness. Some cooks like to fry them after boiling, adding a crisp bite to the otherwise tender texture. With the right seasoning, they became savory, smoky, and deeply satisfying, proving that flavor could be coaxed from even the humblest beginnings. Historically, chitlins were born out of survival. Enslaved Africans were often given the parts of the hog that no one else wanted, and the intestines were among those scraps. But through skill and ingenuity, they turned what was considered waste into meals that nourished both body and spirit. By the time of the Harlem Renaissance, chitlins had traveled north with black families during the Great Migration and gained a new place at the table. They were no longer just survival food. They had become symbols of resilience, resourcefulness, and cultural pride. In Harlem, chitlins showed up at family gatherings, church suppers, and late-night meals after music-filled evenings. They carried history in every bite and sparked conversations that connected generations. For many, they were not simply food. They were tradition, a bond with ancestors, and a reminder that African Americans had always known how to create something valuable out of what others dismissed. Paired with hot sauce, they held their own beside collard greens, cornbread, and fried chicken, adding a powerful reminder that soul food was about far more than taste. It was about memory, endurance, and love served on a plate. Imagine sitting at a Harlem dinner table, the music loud, the laughter louder, but then the lid lifts off the pot, and guess what's inside? You might want to stick around for more. Oxtail stew. Oxtail stew is a dish that is rich, bold, and makes your taste buds break into a little Harlem shuffle. Oxtails, which are literally the tail of the cow, weren't considered fancy cuts back in the day. In fact, butchers would often throw them aside or sell them cheap, making them perfect for African American families who knew how to turn scraps into 5-star feasts. The magic of oxtail stew begins with patience. First, you sear the oxtails in a pot until they're browned and sizzling, filling the kitchen with that unmistakable meaty aroma. Then comes the slow dance, adding onions, garlic, bell peppers, carrots, and a splash of tomato paste. Pour in beef broth or water, season with thyme, bay leaves, black pepper, and let it simmer low and slow. Hours later, the meat slides right off the bone, and the stew is thick, glossy, and begging to be served over rice or mashed potatoes. During the Harlem Renaissance, this was luxury on a budget. Families gathered around steaming bowls, savoring every bite, while jazz played in the background. Each spoonful told a story of resilience, creativity, and pure comfort. The taste? Deep, savory, slightly sweet from the veggies, with oxtails that are tender like velvet. add a slice of hot cornbread to scoop it up, and you've got a meal that'll make you close your eyes and hum a tune. Oxtail stew was, and still is, about celebration. From Sunday dinners to neighborhood get-togethers, it brought people together. Today, it's considered a delicacy, but back then, it was proof that with love and skill, you could turn the least desired cut of meat into the most unforgettable dish: pickled pig's feet. Now, here's a dish that will either make you smile or make you raise an eyebrow: pickled pig's feet. But trust me, once you get past the name, you'll understand why this tangy, salty snack was a hit during the Harlem Renaissance. Back in the day, no part of the pig went to waste. The feet, tough and bony as they are, were cleaned, boiled, and then soaked in a brine of vinegar, garlic, onions, and spices like red pepper flakes. After sitting for a few days, the feet soaked up all the sour, spicy goodness, turning into a chewy, tangy treat. Some folks ate them cold straight out of the jar, while others enjoyed them with hot sauce or alongside collard greens and cornbread. The flavor, think of it like a meaty pickle, tangy, a little salty, with a gelatinous texture that sticks to your lips. Not everyone's cup of tea, but those who loved it swore by it. And the best part? It was cheap. Pig's feet were often sold for pennies, making them a Depression-era delicacy that could be shared at gatherings. During the Harlem Renaissance, pickled pig's feet often showed up at juke joints and house parties. Imagine sipping on bootleg whiskey, listening to Duke Ellington, and gnawing on a spicy, vinegar-soaked pig's foot. Sounds wild. That was the point. It was funky, fun, and unforgettable, just like the era itself. Fried green tomatoes. Before fried green tomatoes became a Southern cliché, they were a Depression-era lifesaver. Picture this. You've got a tomato vine full of fruit that just won't ripen. In times like the Great Depression, throwing food away wasn't even an option, so families got creative. They looked at those hard green tomatoes and said, "Why not?" And just like that, a crispy golden tradition was born. The process was genius in its simplicity. Start with firm, unripe tomatoes and slice them into thick rounds. Sprinkle them with a little salt and pepper, dredge them in cornmeal or flour, dip them in buttermilk if you were lucky enough to have some, then fry them in hot oil until they sizzled and turned golden brown. What came out of the pan was magic, crunchy on the outside, tart and juicy on the inside. Every bite was a perfect mix of crispiness and tang, the kind of snack that made you want to lick your fingers and dive back in for more. During the Harlem Renaissance, fried green tomatoes became a bold statement to the world in general. Southern migrants who moved north to Harlem brought this humble dish with them, turning it into comfort food that reminded them of home. In Harlem kitchens, you'd find families serving fried green tomatoes as side dishes at dinner, as snacks between meals, or even at breakfast alongside eggs and grits. They were so versatile, they could fit in anywhere on the table. And let's be honest, who could resist that crunchy tart combo, especially when topped with hot sauce or dipped in remoulade? The taste was sunshine with a crunch, light, bright, and bold enough to stand on its own, but also perfect for sharing. They had a way of bringing people together too. Fry up a plate, and suddenly neighbors would stop by just to say hello, but really to grab a bite. Fried green tomatoes weren't fancy, but they were unforgettable, a dish that carried the warmth of the South straight into the heart of Harlem. Even today, when you bite into one, you're not just enjoying a crispy snack. You're tasting history, resilience, and the creativity of people who knew how to make the most out of what they had. Boiled peanuts. On to the next, let's talk boiled peanuts, the snack that is as Southern as sweet tea and front porch storytelling. At first glance, it might sound a little strange. Why would anyone take peanuts, which most of us know as crunchy roasted or creamy butter, and boil them in water? But trust me, once you taste them, you will understand why generations of African American families swore by them. The secret starts with green peanuts. These are not your usual roasted peanuts, but freshly harvested ones that are still soft and tender. You take those green peanuts, toss them into a huge pot of water, add a generous handful of salt, and let them simmer for hours. Some cooks added cayenne pepper for heat or smoked ham for depth of flavor. Slowly, the shells soften, and inside, you find warm, tender peanuts that taste nothing like the roasted ones you know. They are earthy, briny, salty, and oh so addictive. Boiled peanuts were more than just a snack. They were survival food and community food. They were cheap to make, easy to cook in bulk, and perfect for sharing. Families made big pots of them for gatherings, and street vendors sold them in paper bags to passers-by. Kids munched on them while running errands or listening to street musicians on corners. For many, the sound of shells cracking and the salty taste of boiled peanuts was tied to laughter, storytelling, and everyday life. During the Harlem Renaissance, boiled peanuts became a nostalgic reminder of home for the thousands of Southern migrants who moved north. They carried the taste of the South with them, offering comfort in a time of big change. Imagine it. You are walking through the streets of Harlem in the 1920s, jazz spilling from a club, poets reciting verses on the corner, painters showing off their latest work. In your hand is a warm paper bag of boiled peanuts, each bite connecting you to memories of family, community, and Southern kitchens. They were more than food. They were edible history. Boiled peanuts represented resilience, resourcefulness, and creativity. They turned something humble and ordinary into a snack full of soul. Even today, when you bite into one, you are not just enjoying a snack, you are tasting culture, tradition, and a piece of Harlem's heartbeat. Hungry yet? Hold on, because the next dish on the list is about to prove that soul food was never just about the flavor, but also joy and community. Hog maw. Hog maw, also known as pig stomach, might not sound glamorous, but for generations it was a dish that proved nothing in the kitchen ever went to waste. During the Harlem Renaissance, Southern migrants brought their culinary traditions north, and hog maw became one of those foods that symbolized resourcefulness. It reminded families that even the parts of an animal often overlooked could be transformed into a flavorful, satisfying meal. Making hog maw into a meal is a process that was an art in itself. First came the cleaning, which had to be meticulous to remove any impurities and ensure a fresh, neutral base. Many cooks would then stuff the stomach with a mixture of sausage, rice, onions, peppers, and a blend of aromatic spices. After tying or sewing it shut, the hog maw would be gently simmered for hours until tender, absorbing every flavor from the stuffing. The aroma alone would fill a kitchen with anticipation, a combination of smokiness, spice, and homey comfort that made mouths water. Another popular method was to boil the hog maw alongside chitterlings, collard greens, or turnip greens. This way, the stomach absorbed the savory flavors of smoked meats and the subtle earthiness of vegetables, creating a one-pot dish that was hearty and nutritious. Served hot, it was filling, very tasty, and deeply satisfying, a meal that could stretch to feed an entire family. In Harlem, hog maw was a connection to the South, a taste of home where most families who had once been given the least desirable parts of animals learned to make every bite count. Today, it remains a dish that celebrates creativity, tradition, and the ability to turn humble ingredients into something unforgettable, honoring a legacy of resilience in every flavorful bite. Turkey wings stew. Turkey wing stew was the definition of comfort food, born out of necessity and creativity. While turkey was often associated with holidays and special gatherings, wings were the inexpensive part of the bird that working families could afford any time of year. During the Harlem Renaissance, turkey wing stew became a staple meal, offering nourishment, flavor, and community at a price that did not stretch budgets too far. Cooking turkey wing stew was both practical and rewarding. The process began with cleaning the wings and seasoning them generously with salt, black pepper, paprika, and garlic powder. To deepen the flavor, the wings were often browned first in a skillet before being added to a pot. Vegetables such as onions, bell peppers, carrots, celery, and potatoes joined the wings, creating a perfect mix that turned into a thick, savory broth. Broth or water would then be poured in, and finally, the pot would be left to simmer for hours until the meat becomes tender enough to fall off the bone. This slow cooking process not only softened the meat, but also allowed the vegetables and spices to meld beautifully to create a stew that was rich and smoky. Served over rice or accompanied by cornbread, turkey wing stew was the kind of dish that filled the stomach and warmed the heart. For many Harlem families, this stew was more than just a meal. It was a lesson in stretching what you had, in making a little go a long way. A few turkey wings and a handful of vegetables could feed a crowd, and no one felt left out at the table. Children grew up watching their mothers and grandmothers transform inexpensive ingredients into meals that tasted like they belonged in fine restaurants. Turnip greens. Turnip greens were one of the most reliable foods on the table during the Harlem Renaissance. Migrants from the South brought with them not only collard greens, but also turnip greens, which later became a delicacy in Harlem kitchens. For families who often worked with limited budgets, greens were inexpensive, plentiful, and nourishing, making them a perfect choice for both everyday meals and Sunday dinners. The preparation of turnip greens was simple, but the flavor was anything but ordinary. First, the leaves were cleaned thoroughly to remove grit and soil. They were then chopped and dropped into a pot of boiling water or broth that was already flavored with smoked turkey, ham hocks, or bacon. Aromatic additions such as onions, garlic, and red pepper flakes were thrown in, giving the greens a bold and savory flavor. Toward the end, a splash of vinegar or a squeeze of lemon juice added brightness and tang, balancing the earthiness of the greens. The taste of turnip greens was distinct. They carried a slight bitterness, but when paired with smoky meats and spices, that bitterness turned into depth and richness. The broth left behind after cooking, known as pot liquor, was cherished. It was sipped like soup or soaked up with hot cornbread, ensuring nothing went to waste. During the Harlem Renaissance, turnip greens were often found bubbling in pots across the city. They were served alongside fried chicken, pork chops, or beans, and always with bread to soak up the pot liquor. In every spoonful of turnip greens, there was comfort, memory, and survival stories to go with it. Cracklin' bread. Cracklin' bread was a dish that proved just how creative African-American cooks could be. At its heart, it was cornbread, but what made it unique was the addition of cracklins, the crispy bits of pork skin and fat left after rendering lard. Instead of discarding them, cooks folded them into cornbread batter, creating a bread with irresistible crunch and savory bursts of flavor. The process of making cracklin' bread started with the basics: cornmeal, a small amount of flour, baking powder, milk or buttermilk, and eggs were combined to form a smooth batter. Then came the star ingredient, warm cracklins, freshly rendered and still rich with flavor. They were stirred into the batter, which was then poured into a hot, greased skillet. The bread was baked until golden brown, filling the kitchen with a comforting aroma. The taste was extraordinary. The bread had the rustic sweetness of cornbread, but each bite offered salty, meaty crunch from the cracklins. It was the perfect balance of savory and sweet, soft and crunchy. Served hot, cracklin' bread often accompanied greens, beans, or stews, but it was so flavorful it could easily stand alone. In Harlem, cracklin' bread was a crowd pleaser. It carried the memory of Southern kitchens where nothing was wasted, where every scrap had value and purpose. Families enjoyed it at gatherings, and it quickly became part of celebratory meals. Its presence on the table signaled creativity, joy, and togetherness. Don't go anywhere yet, because the next mouth-watering treasures we are about to unpack will definitely surprise you even more. Butter beans. Butter beans, also known as lima beans, may not look flashy on a plate, but they have always been a quiet powerhouse in African American kitchens. Affordable, filling, and packed with nutrients, these beans became a staple during hard times, especially in the Harlem Renaissance when families needed dishes that could feed many without costing a fortune. The magic of butter beans starts with their versatility. You could cook them with just a little water and salt, or simmer them low and slow with smoked meats like ham hocks or turkey wings. The beans would soak up every bit of flavor from the meat and spices, turning into a creamy, savory dish that could easily replace a more expensive protein. Some families even mashed the beans with a bit of butter or fat to make spreads or side dishes that could be enjoyed with cornbread. Butter beans were not just survival food, they were a communal delight. Large pots were often cooked on Sundays, with neighbors dropping by to share a bowl or take some home. During the Harlem Renaissance, butter beans were a taste of the South, reminding migrants of home while nourishing them as they navigated the hustle of city life. The taste was simple but comforting. Tender beans with a creamy texture, enriched with the smoky, salty flavor of added meat. They could be eaten alone or paired with any starch, from cornbread to rice. Kids love them just as much as adults, often licking the spoon clean or scooping up every last bean with bread. Cooking butter beans was more than feeding a family. It was a lesson in patience, resourcefulness, and love. Every pot told a story of resilience, creativity, and the ability to take humble ingredients and transform them into something unforgettable. Neck bones and rice. Next up is neck bones and rice, a humble dish that could feed a crowd without emptying a pocket. Pork neck bones, a cut often overlooked, became a culinary hero in African American households during tough times. Slow cooked until the meat was falling off the bone, they released a smoky, savory flavor that infused every grain of rice in the pot. The preparation was part science and part love. You would brown the neck bones lightly in a skillet to lock in flavor, then simmer them in water with onions, peppers, garlic, and a dash of vinegar or hot sauce. Once the meat was tender, rice went in to soak up all that goodness. The rice absorbed the meaty, smoky broth, becoming rich, flavorful, and satisfying. It was cheap, hearty, and endlessly adaptable. During the Harlem Renaissance, neck bones and rice were more than a meal. They symbolized creativity, using inexpensive ingredients to create something remarkable. Families could feed many mouths with just a few neck bones and a bag of rice, turning scarcity into a culinary triumph. On Sundays, this dish often appeared on tables during gatherings, potlucks, or church events, a dish everyone recognized and loved. The flavor was complex despite its humble ingredients. Tender, meaty bites paired with rice that had soaked in all the essence of the pork created a meal that was filling, comforting, and undeniably soulful. Every simmering pot told a story of resilience, resourcefulness, and pride in making the most of what was available. Grits, stone ground. Last but not least, let's talk about grits, the creamy corn porridge that has been a Southern and African American breakfast staple for generations. Stone ground grits were simple, cheap, and endlessly versatile, making them perfect for families during the Harlem Renaissance. Grits start with coarsely ground corn, boiled slowly until soft and creamy. Depending on what was available, they could be served with a bit of butter, salt, and pepper, or dressed up with milk, gravy, or even bits of smoked fish for a richer meal. Breakfast, lunch, or dinner, grits could fill a hungry belly without costing a fortune, which made them a hero during lean times. During the Harlem Renaissance, grits served more than energy-boosting purposes. They represented comfort, tradition, and memory on a plate. Southern migrants brought their recipes to the city, keeping a taste of home alive while creating a culinary identity in a new environment. In Harlem, street vendors sold hot bowls of grits, while families cooked them in their tiny kitchens, and jazz musicians often stopped to grab a quick bite before late-night performances. The texture is creamy, smooth, and slightly gritty in the most satisfying way. Quick question: which of these foods did you ever get the chance to actually taste, or maybe heard your nan talk about while growing up? Drop it in the comments below. We might feature your story in the next video.